Hey guys, Todd James here. Wanted to do a brief video about a subject that is in the news right now, and that is the possibility that we might be getting an increase in the minimum wage, possibly to $15 an hour. And I've actually had some people ask me about this, but the reason I wanted to kind of diverge from the usual subject matter on this channel and talk about the minimum wage is because, for years I have had a consulting business, and I have seen certain things that kind of involve the minimum wage or wages in general over the years that I've been involved with small businesses in a consulting capacity. And I thought that it had some input here that would be useful to think about. I'm not telling anybody what they should do or what they should think, but there's definitely room here for discussion, and I wanted to throw out some thoughts and just kind of give you all something to consider when you're talking amongst your family and friends and associates about the minimum wage. First of all, do I think an increase in the minimum wage to $15 an hour is a good idea? Yes, absolutely, without hesitation. Yes, it's a good idea. Now, we are probably assuming that we get an increase to $15 an hour. That increase will probably not come all at once. My guess is they'll phase it in over a period of 3 to 5 years, and that's just how they do things. Because jumping from what I think is $8.25 an hour now, roughly to $15 an hour all at once would be a shock for some very small businesses. But as I'm about to tell you, I don't necessarily think that shock is a bad thing either. So just bear with me and let's talk about this a little bit. First of all, the strongest reason I have in advocating for an increase in the minimum wage is the fact that, one, it's been decades since we've had an increase in the minimum wage, and two, if you go back 50 years, which is kind of just the accepted norm in discussions like this, and look at the minimum wage 50 years ago, and look at how the increases in the minimum wage have tracked or diverged from the increase in cost of living, you'll understand that a $15 minimum wage is not actually enough to compensate for the increase in cost of living, the inflation over the last 50 years. If you're trying to keep pace with inflation and cost of living, the minimum wage should be somewhere around $22 an hour. So $15 an hour is definitely a step in the right direction. It will be helpful to a lot of people. The number of people that would be elevated out of poverty by an increase to $15 an hour, numbers in the millions. So for those of you who are fortunate enough not to be working near the minimum wage level, understand that those people who are almost always struggling, especially when they're adults, and there are many people working for minimum wage or very close to it that are adults trying to raise families. So for both financial reasons, economic reasons, being the minimum wage has not kept up with the cost of living over the last 50 years. That's a strong statement on behalf of raising the minimum wage, and also just for humanitarian reasons, that you can't work a minimum wage job, and probably you can't even work 2 minimum wage jobs and sustain any kind of lifestyle that involves living indoors and eating 3 meals a day. It just costs too much to live in the United States these days to live off of a minimum wage salary. Something to consider here, and I just want to put this out there, that in terms of my consulting, up until the mid to late 90s, when I was called into a company to consult with them, and I did consulting in the traditional sense. I came in to help companies solve problems. A lot of consultants these days actually go in and fill positions for companies. They're basically replacing somebody who was there, but they're doing so under contract as opposed to being an employee. I was a true consultant. I own my own business. I would go in, meet with the client, talk about what their issues were, and then help them find solutions and implement solutions to resolve those issues. Virtually never did I encounter someone who had issues with minimum wage, or really had issues with wages at all for their employees. There's always an employee here or there who you think probably isn't worth as much as they're being paid, but that's on a case-by-case basis. But over the last, I'll say 20 years, and I'm going to give you some breakdowns here, but over the last 20 years, wages have become, if not the first complaint, certainly one of the top 3 complaints that small business owners have. Just across the board, it's not directed at one employee who maybe isn't highly performing. It's directed at their entire workforce. I have seen what I consider to be a very unsettling change in the behavior of business owners, where there is a sense of entitlement now. A lot of business owners don't realize that there are restraints on their behavior. There are restraints on the things they can do to an employee or expect from an employee. And the fact that they don't observe these historical norms, I'll say, has resulted in things that are typically lumped under the headline of wage theft. But certainly, an even broader headline would be just an unpleasant work environment. We know all about the companies, large and small, that do things like split shifts now. Where they will literally, in the middle of your shift, tell you to punch out, but you can't leave because we may need you to come back as things get busier, but punch out for the time being, which basically, they're monopolizing your time, but they're not paying you for it. That is wage theft in one of its forms. There are a lot of small businesses, local mom and pop businesses that I've dealt with, where they don't pay overtime, or they do some shady things. Just speaking, about something that I know is taking place right now. There's a coffee shop that I go to that's a locally owned coffee shop, and they have employees who work on the line in front, making coffee, baristas. And there are a couple of those employees who also work in the kitchen, and when they go to work in the kitchen, they punch in under a different name, so that they're working there 60 hours a week, but they're only getting paid for, they're only getting paid the same wage for the entire 60 hours. They don't get any overtime. That is the textbook definition of wage theft. That is not how things are supposed to work. It's abuse, it's employee abuse, and it's taking advantage of the system. You see this all the time. There are a lot of reasons for this. One is, we had a lot of businesses started, more so than is typical, say from the mid-90s up. Well, it's still ongoing. There are 2 factors primarily behind the increase in the number of small businesses. One is the baby boomers are dying off, not to be overly blunt, but they're dying off, and they're leaving, in many cases, a significant amount of money to their children. And their children are deciding that they want to create a business and start a business with that money. A lot of times that those businesses are designed to be operated on an absentee basis, where the owner will check in, periodically, but they don't really want to be a part of it. They probably have their own careers in another field somewhere else. For whatever reason, that idea of absentee ownership seems to precede a lot of the wage abuse issues that I've encountered over the last 20 years. Sometimes when you talk to ownership about it or management about it, they are, their eyes are opened and they take steps to correct it. Other times, they're okay with it. They don't care. They're not going to rock their own boat, and they certainly don't want to entertain any idea of paying their employees more, whether individually or as a group. These things were kind of exacerbated, if you will, by the financial crisis in 2007 and 8, which carried on for a number of years. People lost their jobs, and some of those people that had a nest egg, or at least some savings in the bank, they started businesses, and they did so on a shoestring, and that involved in many cases paying below minimum wage or the absolute minimum wage they could get away with without being sued. You end up with a lot of people that then think that they have a right to this business. 5-6 years down the road, they're still in business. They're probably not making a lot of money, but they are enormously protective of what they have, and they just don't want to hear about raising wages. Well, let me ask you about the flip side of that. How many more businesses would there be? How many more jobs would be created if those jobs paid $2 an hour? Okay, think about that. Well, we already have that happening now to some degree in the case of, say, virtual assistants, where you have people in other countries that can offer their services here in the U.S. at a rate way below what you'd have to pay an American-based worker. I use VAs to some degree, and I typically pay somewhere between $3 and $6 an hour, which typically in the worker's home country, that's a good wage. So I'm not looking to cheat anybody or get by on the cheap, but $5 an hour pays more or is more pay in the Philippines, or more viable in the Philippines than it is anywhere in the U.S. Or if I'm using somebody, say, from India, again, $5 an hour in India is a good amount of money. So, you have that business model already, but then people complain. They say, well, yeah, but those jobs take money away from American workers. You're right. So obviously the solution would be to lower the minimum wage in the U.S. to, say, $3 an hour. Do you really think that's a good idea? What about if you lower the minimum wage to $0? And I don't want to put a word on it, but let's call it slavery, or let's call it indentured servitude, whatever you want to call it, whatever label you want to place on it. But does a business have a right to the fruits of your labor? Is a business entitled to benefit from your efforts without compensating you for your time and your sweat and your energy and your resources? Where do you draw the line? I personally don't think any business is entitled to be in business. We have a competitive marketplace in the U.S. It's competitive for a reason, and if your success in that marketplace and if your ability to compete in the marketplace is dependent upon essentially free labor, then obviously you have many shortcomings in your business that you have not been able to address, and you are taking the easy way out. You're going after low-hanging fruit, and you're just trying to basically screw over the people who work for you, who work on your behalf. And from my standpoint, ethically, I think that is a pretty horrible thing to do. So there's a bigger discussion to have here, but I wanted to give you my thoughts on the minimum wage. This isn't meant to be a political statement, but we really are at a point in this country where over the next 50 years, the big conversation needs to be about some type of process whereby the wealth of our nation can be shared. And I don't want to put a label on it. I'm not talking, I'm not advocating for any particular governmental system, but we see some successful experiments in other parts of the world involving a universal basic income, We see some successful policies in other countries, Germany in particular, about job sharing, where two people, literally work 20 hours a week each instead of one person working 40 hours a week. And that's not done so that they can go home and take care of their kids. That's done so that they have a source of income where there's no longer a need for two full-time employees. And in the United States, we're at a situation right now where, truth be told, probably 30% of our workforce is redundant. And these continued shocks we have to the system, like, again, the financial crisis of 2007 and 8, and the crisis we have now due to the pandemic, businesses are opening their eyes to the fact that, there's a lot of redundancy in the system. As hard as they've tried previously to squeeze it out, the crisis of the day is doing the squeezing for them now, and they're realizing they can get just as much done with a lot less. And in this case, the less is fewer employees. Well, people still have to eat. They still have to live indoors. So as a society, we need to make some serious decisions here about how we're going to treat people who may be able to work, willing to work, anxious to work, educated to work. I mean, there's really no, there's no weakness on the part of the potential employee, but they can't work because there's just no job, and there may not be a job where they are located, or there may not be a job anywhere in the country for them anymore. So we have to feed those people. We have to provide housing for those people, or not necessarily provide it via the government, but we have to make some type of resource available to them so that they can live indoors and eat food and go on about their lives. So we may be looking at a situation here where over the next 50 years we have to do something that's really un-American, and that is we have to share via some sort of system involving a universal basic income, so that people can meet their basic needs and then build upon that to have the life that they want. It's not taking away personal motivation or personal initiative, but it's just providing a way for people not to end up living in a box or on the sidewalk in the absence of any other full-time or gainful employment. So again, I see this as being one of those things that just starts off as a simple question: do you believe in a $15 minimum wage? But it expands into a much larger issue that is worthy of discussion and thought and consideration. So just wanted to throw that out there. Again, this is not signaling a new direction for this channel to take, but it's just something that I had encountered quite a bit, and wanted to kind of ask you the same questions I've asked some of my clients when they are telling me that they need to find a way to cut wages and their wages are already rock bottom. It's just a question of what are we entitled to, and that's about it. So anyway, hope this was something that got you thinking about it on a little bit deeper level than what the news is basically putting out there. And if you have questions, feel free to ask in the comment section down below. If you're not subscribed to the channel, how about hitting subscribe? Maybe we'll come up with something else that you like. And in any case, we'll see you in the next video.